business partner Sam Nickerson is here. And as you can see from the slide above, attorney, architect, civil engineer, transportation engineer. Sam, just a little introduction. Sam and I are both residents of this community. We live here, we work here, our kids go to school here. We, as you probably know, recently completed the 47 Railroad Street project. All 13 apartments leased up relatively quickly. I just wanted to sort of walk through the context for this project. Next slide, Jim, if that works for you. So the project was really conceived to meet the goals of the Great Barrington Master Plan and the MXD zone. It's a model of smart growth development, proximity to downtown, existing infrastructure, preservation of open space and farmland. And one of the big points that I think I'd like to make is we are in the project location is within a mixed-use commercial corridor. If you look, it's a little hard to read that slide, but if you look to the north, so just to give you an orientation.
North.
Yeah, up as north, right. To the north of us is Construct and obviously Mahawi Street with a significant amount of office spaces. To the south, obviously Ward's Nursery, Resilience, Big Y Shopping Center, the Bagel Shop. Another thing that's, I think, interesting is that this is not the only standalone project. There is a pipeline of projects up and down this corridor. The Boston Garden expansion that's supposed to start this fall. The CDC will be developing 50 units on the parcel that they closed on a couple months ago. There's 18 condos proposed on Mahawi Street, and then obviously the Guido's expansion that's in the works over the next 2 years. So a significant amount of activity, which I think speaks to the fact that it's the master plan and the MXD zone were created to foster this type of development. I'm going to hand it over to Sam, who's going to talk a little bit about housing, and then we'll try to speed through as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I'll try and be brief because I know we have a lot to get through. I thought it would be important, just as additional context, to talk about the experience that we had at 47 Railroad Street, because what we learned through the course of that project was that it was the first new market rate apartment project that had been done since 1990. There had been other smaller projects where people had taken houses and divided them up into a couple of units, but it was the first one that had been done really in a whole generation. And not only that, we're in a market where a lot of the more modest, smaller condos and homes that normally might be rental units are getting snapped up and diverted into kind of an Airbnb, sort of Tanglewood short-term rental model. So not only are we in a market where we haven't been adding new housing units to the rental supply, it's actually shrinking by some measures with some of the divergence that I was talking about. So it's one thing to talk about a plan and look at market studies. It's quite another to actually get out in the marketplace and meet people. And we weren't 100% sure what would happen with 47 Railroad, but we obviously put a lot of due diligence into it. And the results have been tremendous in terms of demand. We leased up 100% of the units very quickly. We now have a waiting list, and it's quite a diverse group of people that are renting there. It is everything from 20-year-old all the way up into the mid-80s. It is single, young professionals, couples, families, and retirees. And so what we've found is that it really proved out the idea we had for 47 Railroad, which is that the sort of housing ecosystem in Great Barrington is a little bit out of balance because of the lack of new supply of market rate rental units. But Ian talked about a number of affordable projects which are in the pipeline, but 47 Railroad and this proposed project are the only reasonable sized market rate rentals, and it's sort of a somewhere in the middle. It's not at the very high end where you're seeing some of the condos, but it's not all affordable either. It's really meeting the needs of a lot of different people. And the one group that I wanted to especially highlight is the senior population, because the existing rental stock as it is, I think the average age is something like 75 years. And that, what it means is that for somebody who is a senior, and a lot of people are getting to the point where they're kind of over the joy of home ownership and they want a more simple lifestyle, there really isn't any kind of a housing product that's available to meet the needs of those people. So the fact that we have the elevator in 47 Railroad is huge. And there are a lot of people who can really use the accessibility of a new kind of 21st century ADA compliant building, and that's just a huge need. So we're seeing it on a daily basis. But so that's all I'm going to say, and I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Sam, one question for you. On 47 Railroad, the apartments, can you tell us what percentage of those are full-time residents?
Yeah, essentially all of them are. Yeah. I mean, we have some people who, for instance, we have a doctor that's kind of here on a short-term basis, and I think her husband is living elsewhere in another apartment, but she's here full-time. So, and that's the type of tenant that we've really tried to attract, because part of what we're doing also is trying to build the community foundation of the economy. I mean, when you have people living in the downtown, they're shopping the restaurants, they're shopping the stores, and we're hearing from employers that a lot of people are driving up to an hour to work in Great Barrington. So that's a missed opportunity for the town for that. So we've precluded people from doing Airbnb rentals in 47 Railroad, partly for security, but also partly because that's just not the kind of tenant we want.
What about part-time residents who come to Berkshires themselves and leave their property vacant when they want to?
Do we have people that are here part of the time? I mean, we may have one or two, but I think the majority of them are full-time residents.
So I'm Elizabeth Goodman, attorney at Kane Hibbard and Myers, and I'm just speaking again to give us the framework, the legal framework for this project. The zoning law that applies. First of all, it's a very interesting project. It's in the MXD zone, so this is a by right project. The project's going to be residential plus commercial unit, and that meets the setbacks, meets the parking requirements, and 47 units, 50 parking spaces, it's by right. But there are 2 permits required, we call them permits. The property, all of the property is located in Zone 2 of the Water Quality Protection Overlay District. So under the Overlay District, compliance is required with the conditions in section 9.2, and the application goes through all of the conditions required in section 9.2.12, and that's the special permit that's required for this project. It's the Water Quality Overlay District permit. So the other permit or review that's required is site plan. And site plan is triggered because it meets all the criteria in 10.5.1, which are the criteria for site plan review in your zoning bylaw, and also because it meets the overlay district water quality special permit. So the site plan review criteria in 10.5 is where you get the traffic assessment requirement. And we, as you know, have the traffic engineer here who's done an excellent review meeting the Mass DOT requirements. She'll describe that. But it's clear that in the 2 reports, the traffic assessment, there are no issues. It's pretty overwhelmingly clear that it doesn't change the levels of service either with or without the development. And again, we have the specifics to back that. And so we're all ready to go into the nitty-gritty details.
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
How many lots are on that property?
Well, right now existing four, I'm corrected, 4 lots.
So right now you have, assuming the building the commercial is in, that's one mixed use, but the other lots are residential and require a special permit.
Well, now they're all owned in one entity, are they not?
But they're still different lots.
Uh,
I mean, you may view that as a technicality, but I view putting 1,000 square foot commercial and calling it mixed use a technicality as well, so.
It is true your definition of mixed use says in a building or in a lot.
Right.
And so this project proposes 1 commercial unit in the 3 residential buildings.
The only reason the 4 lots, well, they're separate now and have not been combined into one lot is because we've financed each one of those individual buildings at separate times. So we bought the first building, got financing, bought the second building. So they need to and will be required to be one lot in order for us to proceed.
Look, I mean, from my standpoint, I think your 1,000 square foot commercial is trying to bypass a special permit, and we've given you that loophole. I mean, it's our fault because we gave you that loophole because a couple of years ago we reduced the number of commercial, the amount of commercial footage required in a mixed use development. But I believe that's a loophole, and I think that I'm really sorry you're not just doing a residential development and going and getting a special permit for that residential development.
Well,
So if I could just speak to this point quickly. So we actually had designed this kind of as a smart growth development, taking advantage of the infrastructure that's there. And similar to 47 Railroad, I mean, we actually like the commercial component of this. And our original plans had been to do a lot more ground floor commercial on this site. So part of the process we went through was community outreach, and we had a couple of meetings with the neighborhood. The feedback that we got from residents in the neighborhood was that they all wanted as little commercial as possible. So we actually scaled it back to address that. So.
and I have to say, I don't think it's a loophole. I mean, you can argue about what it is, but the intent is to have it mixed, and there is going to be a commercial unit, and it's right next to the commercial, downtown.
Can you describe the commercial unit that'll be there?
Yes, so we do not have a defined tenant, but just like 47, when we permitted the project, we had no defined
But
tenants.
that's a little different in mixed use. I mean,
Yes, so it would be something that contributes to, we hope, Manville Street, to residents that live there, to residents that live in the development. So it could be something like a gym, it could be a yoga studio, it could be a coffee shop, it could be something like that. And obviously it's going to be dictated by, what kind of tenant we can find, but something like that. To your point, we want commercial there. We would like more commercial there, but because again, that's what we do. We do mixed-use projects. We believe that once you get to a certain density, there's an inherent need to provide some basic services. So we would like to do more, but we are also very cognizant and trying to be sensitive to the fact that it is a transitional neighborhood. There's pockets of residential, and then there's commercial, there's retail, there's mixed use. So I mean, we're open to discussion.
So, are you guys gonna provide
Yes,
discussion of your
yes.
plans? Yeah.
Yeah, we're moving on.
Yes.
So I'm Michael Valenti. I am not the architect for the project. The architect of the project is from New York, but I've been working closely with the owners and the architects and the other MEP trades to kind of get this building together and represent the owner's needs and aesthetics. I'll briefly go over just kind of the general design of the project. As part of the requirement for site plan review, we discusses character of the neighborhood and scale, context, materiality. So I will shortly kind of, since we haven't really seen the site plan up here yet, and not to steal Jim's thunder or anything, but look at the site plan briefly at the top right here. So basically at the end of Manville, this square street, it's going to be 3 buildings, 2 smaller ones in the front and 1 smaller one in the back. This is a example floor plan of the unit with the commercial space, which is right here, which is located closest to the corner at Manville here. There'll be a variety of apartments between 1 and 3 bedrooms, very similar to this plan here. You can imagine the one in the back is basically 2 of these sandwiched together, and they each share their own common elevator and stair lobby that gives you access up and down to the units. One of the important features of this project was how we were going to design the site, and I'll get back into that later. But we thought it was very important, instead of doing one massive building, to break down the scale, do several buildings, and also provide green space not only for the residents of the project, but also residents of the street. So, you know, we basically start the development directly at the end of Manville, to very similarly to how it is today, with you know, a green space. So this green space will help screen you know, much of the development from Manville, but also you know, being an encouraging place for people to visit. The owner intends to allow people from the public to come in, enjoy the courtyard space, use the commercial unit, as well as the residents. Below, there's 2 proposed renderings for the project. This one on the left being the view right from coming down Manville Street. So if you were coming down here, this is what you would see, and this is the commercial piece right in this corner down here. This is a view from the central courtyard, and as you can see, we're using a stucco finish for the exterior of the buildings. They're gable-ended, typical New England style buildings. We're not proposing anything out of character. We've got metal standing seam roofs. We've got windows that align horizontally and vertically, much like you see in the surrounding neighborhoods. And we also are proposing a lot of vegetation. That, you know, as you probably noticed when you were down there on Manville Street, there is, you know, a decent amount of trees and vegetation. We want to continue to keep as much of that as we can on the perimeter, but also include some more on the inside. So I'll move to the next size. I've kind of taken that whole site plan and zoomed out for us, and I just wanted to put up a couple different existing and proposed projects on the screen for us to review. Number 1 would be the Beach Street Commons site down here, which is a 66 apartment unit complex that directly abuts the site. You know, clearly a similar use and a similar scale of building. We also have Ward's Nursery, which is number 2 down here and up in the upper right-hand corner. Again, a large, you know, scale commercial use that's, you know, based almost a direct abutter to the property. Again, we see a lot of this area. You see a lot of different uses. This is basically a commercial corridor with a lot of existing residential buildings that have been converted to either mixed use or entirely commercial. Then we'll come right up here to Manville Street. We've got number 3 here, right on the corner, is an existing multifamily building. I want to point out, I know it's a little small, but point out its similarities in the sense that it's a 3.5-story building with windows that go all the way up through the gable. You know, everything's similar. This building is actually stucco. It's just like ours. As well as number 4 here, this is a condo building that's also 3.5 stories, completely stucco. So we're trying to take some of the elements that you see on Manville Street and integrate them into the project. I'll go up here one more street. We've got number 5, which is Construct, which is everyone I'm sure is aware of, is the transitional housing offices here. And then 6, while it's not built, you can go I went and took a picture of the sign that's out in front of it, which is an 18-unit condo building, palazzo, maybe it's a palazzo, I'm not sure. But it's, you know, again, proposing another multifamily use in the zone. And then just to briefly discuss the context of the materials and aesthetics. Again, I kind of went back, I spoke about this in the previous slide. But again, we've got, in terms of the stucco design, alignment of windows vertically, horizontally, we've got 4 other similar looking homes, in terms of that on the property, or I'm sorry, on the street, that was the point your attention to, probably saw today. One other thing I'd like to briefly discuss is some of the constraints and opportunities we looked at the site architecturally, and for the comfort of the residents. One would be this, railroad track here. We've had discussions about a lot of people wanting us to push this thing all the way back or all the way forward. We wanted to keep it away from the track so that, the residents that live on the side wouldn't have to deal with the train all the time. Another thing we reviewed carefully is fire and emergency access. You'll notice that there is a complete loop all the way around to allow for a one-way road and easy ambulance and fire truck access. Site layout and green space, I alluded to that earlier, with just the amount of green space we're providing. Density is something that we discussed a lot in the project. At one point we talked about one single building with trying to put as many units on the site as possible. We estimated you could put anywhere from 60 to 80 on here possibly. We ended up with 47 and breaking it into smaller buildings with a smaller scale, which I think is desirable. And then also because of the water quality special permit, we have the storm water management requirement, which requires for a lot of subsurface, water filtration features, which they'll get into later, but we needed a large amount of open space to accomplish that. So with that, I will conclude my section and hand it over to Mr. Scalise.
Good evening. For your record, my name is Jim Scalise, engineer with SK Design Group in Pittsfield. I thought I'd start by maybe just backtracking a little bit. This property consists of really 4 single-family residences in a section of Manville Street, which was, I guess, abandoned. I'm not sure that's discontinued as it related to town meeting. So this is now all potentially merged and becomes one parcel. I know there's some debate about that. I don't need to get into that. That's just part of my presentation. The zone is in the MXD mixed-use transition zone.
Jim, is that correct? Because I don't think it's actually a square.
I think it actually comes up this line right here,
yes,
and then it jogs. My simple software wasn't able to draw that when I was drawing the slide. I apologize if that's confusing. It's 2.15 acres of land. So this 261 feet of Manville has been discontinued. And I put some little suns or stars on the properties that are non-single-family homes. So we have some commercial, we have multifamily, we have some office use. So just to kind of give a context from just a site perspective, that 11 of the 20 surrounding properties have slightly more intense use than single-family use. So a project overview. This is the site plan prepared by the project architect. It shows a bunch of the trees. I know we discussed this at the site visit. You can see that there's a row of trees, north being up the sheet on the westerly edge, that are right along the property line. The survey shows that some of these are on property, which I've colored in green here. Some of these are just off. But the intent really, as it relates to these trees and as part of this overview, is to try to save the perimeter trees, as I suspect. There's a couple here up front that we'd like to save, but depending on the drip line, the activity in building foundations, and I'll show you the site plan in a minute, there's a fair amount of site disturbance. I would suggest that the majority of the interior mature trees will be removed as part of the project. So the project as proposed is a by right under the zoning, under the MXD zone. The project is located in the Water Quality Protection Overlay District. This does require a special permit. I'll go into details on how we comply with that. Mike's described the building's earthwork as it relates to your site plan review is minimal on the site. It's a relatively flat site. There's very little grading. It actually made stormwater management a bit of a challenge due to the lack of slope on this particular property. The property is serviced by town water and sewer services. There's electricity on the site. So this site has services, which is a good infill, and I think is an important component as it relates to this relatively new zone. So we have a stormwater collection system that meets stormwater management standards, as well as infiltration systems that meet the direct requirements of the Water Quality Protection District. The proponent is one topic that came up was exploring pedestrian connections, so we are exploring pedestrian connections with both the north and the south construct through their property, as well as to the south through the existing apartment complex, Beech Tree Apartments. So that is in our plans. We have a detailed traffic study which has been completed to support a finding under the site plan review that we have a traffic engineer, Juliet, is here from VHB, who can elaborate further. I'm going to give you, again, a general overview of traffic. And as it relates to parking, which is a specific requirement under the section for this MXD zone, we're proposing 54 parking spaces, I believe 47 dwelling units and 1,000 square feet of commercial space, so we're actually slightly over parked. For the water quality protection district, here's what it looks like. I gave you just some schematics to try to show you what we're proposing. Under our parking areas, we're proposing the installation of chambers. And note that this one chamber that comes out of the drainage structure itself is wrapped in a geotextile fabric, creating what we call an isolator row. That helps, so you have a deep sump in the structure, which is, there's space in the structure below the pipe. And what that allows is for storage and capture of sediment. And then you have an isolator row which further captures sediment and allows for maintenance. And then the clean water will flow through the fabric and into these other chambers, which promotes infiltration. And engineers like cross sections. So here's a typical cross section. In our courtyards, we have these rain gardens, which are planted, depressed areas that create landscaping and collect storm water. As they pond and fill up, you have a drain inlet that's raised up a few inches or maybe half a foot, and it directs that water from the plantings into these underground chambered systems, which are these plastic dome-type structures that are surrounded in crushed stone and then backfilled up to the parking level. So the way the math works is based on your soil type, and you're in this particular zone. You have a hydrologic soil group. In this case, it's type A, which means it's a very sandy, excessively well-drained soil. Based on that, you have to do a calculation of how many of these chambers you need, or how much water based on volume, which is a very simple approach. So based on a volumetric approach, again, a very simple approach, 3,000 cubic feet, 3,050 cubic feet of infiltration volume is necessary to meet the requirements for groundwater recharge. We also use this underground system to mitigate peak flows. So when it rains, water goes into the system, it stores the volume, and then it discharges at a very low rate over time. That way it doesn't overload neighboring properties or the existing town's drainage system. Because of that combination use, you have 21,000 cubic feet provided. So a significantly greater volume than the water quality protection district requires. But that also allows us to mitigate rainfall, so you don't have any off-street flooding.
Can I ask,
Sure.
the rain gardens?
Yep.
The only thing that gets put into the pipes is stuff that's overflow in the rain garden.
That's right.
Everything else percolates.
So yeah, that's right. So you have, what you do is you put in the plan, the detailed drawings, which I can get to in a minute, but we put in a filter media. So you put in like a compost type soil, so you plant it with vegetation, and this will actually have some retaining ability, so the water will actually pond. It's made for that first flush, maybe a quarter inch of rain, which tends to be the most contaminated of all your rainfall, so it flows into these areas. The plants have some nutrient uptake before it's discharged into, or if it percolates through the soil, it gets treated and goes through an underdrain, or if it does fill up, so you get kind of past that first flush, but you get a more intense rainfall, it goes into that drain pipe, which is illustrated really in both these details right here, and again sticking up right here, and then that would short circuit the soil media and go into this system, and then it's infiltrated into the ground. We've done extensive soil testing out there. We did a handful of borings, and we did 10 or so test pits, and Sarah will correct me, but many test pits, and what we found in all cases was a very sandy, clean sand material with some gravel. Our soil borings went to 17 feet with we never encountered groundwater. So a really high and dry site, which is ideal for this type of system. So site plan review topics. I broke down site plan review topics to just 8 simple topics in an effort to try to simplify without going through the verbose setup that you have in your zoning. I'll let you make those conclusions. I just wanted to touch on the topics and kind of give you the engineering data. So the first, if you go, there's actually guidance that's out there on site plan review under Massachusetts law and how it fits, and these are the topics that are listed in that guidance, so I'm going to just run through those for you. The first of which is pedestrian and vehicular access. So we've talked about that this site will have really a pedestrian courtyard between the buildings that ties directly into the Manville Street, which has a sidewalk one side on the north side of the street that runs all the way down to South Main Street. As far as we've talked about coordination with abutting properties both north and south, and with no connection for pedestrians to obviously to the railroad to the west. The next topic we looked at would be traffic, or actually if I back up a little bit, access is part of that first one. The project includes a circular driveway that Michael mentioned a minute ago. It's a one-way driveway that's counterclockwise that runs around the entire site. So if I go back here, there's a driveway that goes around the entire site. So emergency vehicles, delivery vehicles, nobody has to back up. It makes for good circulation around the property. We've done a SWEP analysis, which is a computer model of the town's fire truck that drives around the site. Your particular truck has a fairly large rear end that goes beyond the rear axle, which it creates an overhang. So when it goes around the corner, so we map that out. I can show you that. It's been submitted to Chris. It'll be formally submitted. Has it been submitted yet? Not yet. Okay, we have it. We're going to submit it to you. It was requested. We've completed that analysis. We have an engineered plan to support that the fire truck can drive around the site. Traffic assessment. Juliet's here and can elaborate on this. I thought I would give you the general practitioner civil engineer approach. First thing I look at is the number of average daily trips, 354. AASHTO has a manual that I have on my desk that talks about 400 ADTs. It's called very low volume roads. So 400 is kind of a threshold number, at least in my simple civil engineering approach to traffic. I'm at 354. So daily trips from this site is below the very low traffic threshold. And then I also look at peak hour, both morning and evening, as it relates to the nearest intersection, which is South Main. So in our case, we're at 27 and 35 trips. So here's my rule of thumb for that, is if you're below 25 peak hour trips, you're not expected to significantly contribute to traffic congestion. It's kind of the first threshold where you really don't need a study. You kind of prepare a memo. Jim Scalise probably prepares that, doesn't have Juliet here at all, and we just move on. In this particular case, we're at 27 and 35, so we're a little over that minimum threshold, but we're not at the 50. The 50 number is where I start to say, okay, what do we need to do, or is there mitigation, or is there questions about traffic? So we kind of fall in between we don't have to talk about it hardly at all, and we need a detailed study. As part of our neighborhood outreach, we found that there was concern about traffic, and I can tell you that perception and change in neighborhoods is hard. That you probably have 3 houses out there that generate maybe 10 trips, 12 trips a day, 35 trips. We're talking 10 times that traffic. So as a person who lives on that street, you're going to have a perception there's a lot of cars. From a traffic engineering perspective, this doesn't really move the needle. It's just not enough traffic to be a safety issue or a design issue. We looked at improvements. Existing right now, there isn't a stop sign or a stop line at the end of the street that needs to be installed. Staff analysis, and I'll get to it in a minute, suggested maybe a stop sign, maybe a traffic calming measure is the way I perceived it, but a stop sign at our curb cut, so that people exiting our curb cut will come to a stop, so we don't have folks racing down the street. That would possibly create some calming, which is a good thing. So overall, a project like this is only a 1.7% increase as it relates to South Main Street traffic. Level of service, if you look at the projected, how traffic engineers look at things, is they project things to the future kind of with an inflation clause. So we look at it with traffic generation increasing. And if you look at that, both the no build, where this project doesn't exist, and the build, we don't change the level of service. And level of service is, it's a gap of time. So this project may add a couple of seconds to a delay as you wait at that stop sign, but it isn't considered significant unless the level of service changes, and that doesn't happen here at this site. So from a traffic perspective, we feel we have a project that's easily within your site plan review guidelines, but at the same time are very sensitive to the fact that the neighborhood has concerns. Parking, 49 spaces required, 54 provided. We've provided all the parking on the side and the rear, other than a few spaces here, which will have some fencing and screening. But generally speaking, we sprinkle parking kind of surrounding the site. We created an interior pedestrian core. It's a good design. It keeps the conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles to a minimum. So we exceed your your parking requirements. Landscaping and screening. The way the site is located, the context of the site is along the railroad, commercial or multifamily apartments to the south, generally commercial to the north. We've located our parking kind of to the rear and to those sides, so we feel as though interior landscaping as allowed by our buried structures and rain gardens will be provided. These circles show proposed trees on the site plan. These may be shrubs as we want to mix. We have a landscape architect and landscaper on our team, and we have narrative that's been provided as it relates to various trees and shrubs proposed on the property.
I'd like to point out that every plant that they propose is a native species.
It's a good thing, right? Okay.
That's a great one.
Okay.
Jim, I have one question on the traffic,
Sure.
which comes out to roughly 7+ trip ends per day per unit, which is, I think, what you expect for condos and stuff. Where you would typically have, most often I would expect 2 cars. We're only requiring 1 car. Does that have any impact on the traffic?
You know, the potentially yes. I mean, having less cars obviously generates less traffic. I agree with that. But from a traffic, following the treatises that traffic engineers follow, we don't take that into account. Right. So you're getting a more conservative traffic analysis here because it's based on, national. What they do is they take statistical analysis by looking at national projects that are similar uses in nature, low-rise apartments and what their trip generation is everywhere, and that's how we do this. Great Barrington has a little different nuance in that this is considered to be more of a walkable use. It's encouraging using transit, has a lower parking rate, which I think is
what's transit?
buses would be an approach.
Wait, we're in Great Barrington. What's transit?
Okay, but I mean that's kind of the driver as it relates to less parking, and it's been found nationally. I mean, the example I use in Pittsfield over and over is if you look at the Walmart Plaza there in an aerial photo, there's never been a car parked in the center of that parking lot, and I've got about 3 acres of pavement there. So there's clearly a disconnect, particularly as projects grow in density, just plugging into a formula. If you have a 3-unit project that needs 6 parking spaces, sure. But when you get to 47 units, if you made this a 95 parking spaces, it'd be way overparked. And I think you just talked about that in the previous application, and I think it's a similar instance there. So the Urban Land Institute has spent a ton of effort to try to drive parking numbers down because it's less impervious area.
Sure.
We felt it pertinent based on our use and based on our experience that we would want a little more parking, so we proposed that than what you require. But that's how we arrived at that number. So the direct correlation we're not going to talk about or take credit for. We're going to stick with kind of this national approach.